and what do we mean by a launch? And I'm asking these questions because not a lot of people know what source is, but we'll get to that in a moment. Yesterday, I had integration of source, and I also heard we are launching source in South Africa. And I just want you to take us through what those things actually mean before we start defining what source is.
So hi everyone, and thank you for joining. Yesterday basically was the ISA was presenting what we have been doing with them in terms of customizing the platform with the South African process that they wanted to have inside the platform. So what we mean by integration, it means that we customizing the platform based to the specificities of the country, and we align it to the common framework that we have. So we have been doing this for the past more than a year in order to get there. And from ISA perspective, it means that the SIP project will be put into source in order to get a certain level of preparedness from a common framework perspective that has been developed into source in order to have those projects addressing certain criteria that the private sector is looking for when it comes to well-prepared projects. So that's what it means when it comes to integration. And yesterday was presenting what the work had been done with between our team, the local consultant, and ISA, and for them to show how they are going to use it, how it has been institutionalized as well inside ISA to make sure that the platform is actually used. But then the next step would be to have also trainings and awareness raising to the sponsors with aligned ministries. So that would be the next step when it comes to source in South Africa.
Oh, thanks for that. So would you say that source was launched not necessarily for the benefit of ISA, but it's actually for the greater public good in as far as any line ministry, what we call sponsors in this country, to be able to access the platform and do whatever that they need to do on that? That's my first question. And the second one, when you spoke about in line with the requirements of the private sector, is the idea that you use source when you have a project that is financeable, not if such a word exists, but by the private sector. And I'm asking this because, again, we have a lot of social projects that are not necessarily able to raise finance. Can they also be on the platform? How does that work?
So yeah, for the second question, the source is agnostic on the type of procurement. When we, for example, speak with the private sector, the level of preparedness for them is independent on the type of procurement, whether it's a PPP or a traditional procurement. The reason is that when you're going to have EPCs to bid for a project, they're going to need to have access to data. And the data that they will need will be important to make sure that whatever is available will be an opportunity to have the information that they need for their due diligence. So that means that if it's a social project, you don't need to have or to raise private sector finance, because it doesn't work that way, but it still needs a good level of preparation. And this is where source is coming in. Then whether or not ISA will use it in that way and with the line ministries, that is, of course, the decision of South Africa on the government. And that's an opportunity also to speak with the Treasury today on what do you see as value in source, and whether or not this is something that you see could make sense also to work. Because I think ISA working in silo just with source doesn't really make sense. It has to be a collaborative approach. And we have seen that type of collaborative approach in the different countries. So I think that would be the approach that we would look for.
Yeah, and I think, look, I mean, here I have to express my bias, right? In that, from an appraisal perspective, one of the big gaps that we have seen in as far as driving our infrastructure ambition, or as a country, is the lack of a continuous, of a credible and sometimes an implementation ready pipeline. And I think, you know, what you are saying resonates with me in that whether the project is funded by the fiscus or, you know, finance is raised on it from the private sector, the point is that projects have to be well prepared. And in that sense, I suppose you are saying that you will be, well, the platform supports both, you know, PPPs, blended finance, social, and any other project that you know, we want to see being supported through the process. And I think you know, to the credit of ESA, and that must be said, I mean, they are effectively the ones who are sort of the, can I call them the local anchors in as far as source is concerned. And I have no doubt in my mind that you know, they will be working with you as we're talking about training and the like to ensure that, you know, this system is rolled out to as many people as we possibly can, just so that, you know, it doesn't matter where you are. If, you know, someone asks and says, you know, what does your project look like? Have you met these requirements? And so on and so forth. It is easier for you to use the platform and say, yeah, I've actually, out of the many questions that have been asked, we've been able to answer as many of those as possible. And we think, based on the judgment call that we are making, that this is a good project. And actually, this is also the level of, you know, preparedness, because you do have matrices around, you know, the level of preparedness and the like. Now, just so that we don't lose people that are on the call, what I want you to do for me in the next couple of minutes is help people understand what source is. Okay, let's demystify what this platform is, and let's also talk about the benefits of having this kind of a platform, so that when ESA has a conversation with them, they can say, oh, there's a start platform that can actually do some of these things that is beneficial for them as an institution or a sponsor, but also in terms of, you know, the SIP projects that we are talking about, it also becomes clearer why it makes sense for them to put their project onto the platform. And for colleagues that are online, I mean, you can join this conversation by posting your questions on the chat, and a little later on we will be able to read them out, and hands that are raised will also be acknowledged, and we can, you know, really have this robust conversations around this new platform that we are excited to hear about. Over to you, Christophe.
Thank you, Boitumelo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, so I can give you a really quick presentation of what the platform does. So there is a short slide and also the platform itself, but I'm going to do it very quick so we can have also a discussion. But first, I think what is important is to show that source is delivered as a common good by MDBs. The MDBs are here just as a governance and providing some funding and be part of the organization enabling the delivery of the platform globally. Source has been created for two reasons, as we were discussing before, on supporting governments towards well-prepared projects from an IT perspective, from a software perspective, and at the same time supporting the agenda of digitalization in governments. So that's the reason why the MDBs created Source. There is a recognition at the G20, but that is not necessarily important. What is important to see is that for the past 3 years, we have been working directly with countries, and that has been quite successful. Why? Because the countries, they want to have their processes digitalized, but at the same time, they want to access global common frameworks to speak the same language as the private sector, whether it's a PPP or a traditional procurement, as we were discussing. What has been beneficial is to see that Ecuador, Uzbekistan, and Ukraine, but for the moment it is not deployed for obvious reasons, but Ecuador, Uzbekistan, and Ukraine, they have implemented the platform. They also have enacted it into law. And South Africa with ESA, they also institutionalized the platform for all their projects, the SIP projects. There are also other countries that are implementing it in green. Also, G7 countries like France and Germany. France has started also to implement the platform at the subnational level, and I will show you why. Is to provide some guidances to their subnational authorities when it comes to a PPP, because it's also complicated, and Germany the same. So it's not only G20 countries or emerging countries, it's also G7 countries. So this is what is going on globally. We have more demand than we can supply, but at least we are getting funding from the European Commission with 3 million euros or the AFD 1 million euro to deliver source and meet the demand. So that is where we are globally. In terms of the process, I will not go into the details, but we basically work with the government to customize the platform. I'm going to show you what it looks like. So the platform is available online, which means that it's available inside United Nations servers in order to guarantee data immunity and data sovereignty to the governments. My team and I, we don't have access to the data. We developed the platform, but all the data is stored inside the UN jurisdiction. So that is very important when it comes to data. I'm going to show you quickly 3 functionalities that we have developed in order to meet the benefits of the countries. The first one is to have a place where all the information is aggregated at the individual level inside the ministry. So, for example, inside Ministry of Transport. So the person can see all the projects that he or she is involved with, but also different notifications and tasks. Also a dashboard to see how the project is meeting different KPIs that the country has. So that is really at the individual level, a project officer inside the Ministry of Transport. When we've done that, there was a request from countries to say, we need the same thing, but aggregated at the national level to see everything that is going on inside the country. So what we did, for example, a minister or a director of infrastructure inside the ministry can see all the projects that the person is, the ministry or the country has, and also a way to have this portfolio at the national level aligned with different SDGs. That has been also very successful in countries because it's an opportunity to see quantitatively how the pipeline in the country is aligned with different SDGs, but also, again, with different KPIs that the country can have. So that is really the approach at the planning level. So everything aggregated, individual level inside the ministry or at the national level. Creating a project, because if we want to have aggregated data level, we need to create projects. So creating a project is fairly simple. You're going to have different sectors, and each sector has different subsectors. So we call them templates. And each template has different dimensions, whether it's greenfield, brownfield, unsolicited project proposal based on the World Bank work, or cross-border project, because that is also important in certain jurisdiction. And that is basically a way just to create a project. Once the project is created, then this is what we see. So the project is created. Here you can see 4 statuses. They are specific to Uzbekistan. So this is the process that we have been doing with ISA, is to identify the processes that they wanted to have. For example, in the case of Uzbekistan, if it's not a PPP, you're going to have different tasks that are specific to Uzbekistan. But if it's a PPP, you're going to have other tasks. They have different project threshold and different tender processes. So that's basically the first benefit, is to be able to digitize and digitalize all these internal processes inside the country. But some countries already have that digitalized, and we like it when they already have their platform, because we can just connect to the platform and they can benefit from what is unique to source, the templates. So I'm going to show you what it looks like, the process that I was showing you. So for example, the 4 statuses are here. You have the different tasks, who it is assigned to, organization, start date, end date. So something very user-friendly. So it's easy to go from A to Z inside a country and to have different type of reports, Gantt chart, and statuses. So for the country to be able to share that with different stakeholders. So that is for the country, as I said, to go from A to Z. What we did, and every time we go into a country,
is to have this aligned with our common framework. So here you can see the statuses of Uzbekistan. So in South Africa, we identified 6 statuses. And each sections have been designed also to structure the project. And there are different studies and assessments and reports that are being created along the life cycle of the project. I was discussing that with DBSA just before that meeting, and they see that as an opportunity when they discuss, for example, with a city, instead of having all the different reports that the city brings, then they can just say, oh, can you just fill out this section and this section, upload the document, so everything is into one place with a common framework. So here we can see multiple choices. We can see different type of answers, but also numerical answers, as you can see here. So the opportunity here is just to have an online guidance with structured data, also intuitive, of course, for the government. But why is it a good online guidance? Is because we have developed the platform with the private sector, so the templates. And those are the institutions that we have been working with and still working with. So they provided us with more than 7,000 comments to create 40 subsector templates. So that is the second important aspect of the platform. So the first one is the planning with the aggregated data at the individual and ministerial level. And the second is this common language between the public sector and the private sector. And that is basically unique to Source in terms of having a common framework that countries can benefit from in order to have the important aspects of a project that are addressed before going to tender. And that it's also a good opportunity for the country to filter some projects that are not necessarily prepared or advanced enough before the tender stage. So the country is in full control on the level of preparedness that the country wants to do. Also, the country is in full control of the access to the information. For example, that was the third functionality that we had to develop for countries, is that the country, they want full control on who can see what and when. So for example, the project is created by the Ministry of Transport, but the person that creates the project, the sponsor, decide who can see what and when. So that's an opportunity for the country to keep control on who can see what and when. But the person can also invite MDBs or donors, consultant, private sector with different rights and permissions in order to compartmentalize the information at different stages. So this is the third functionality that was key for the countries, is this communication flow between the different ministries and agencies with, of course, compartmentalized data set if necessary. So when we've done that, the countries, they said it's great. However, the questions are very difficult to answer. So what we did is a matchmaking between the project preparation facilities that exist from donors, bilateral and multilateral, so that the country or the government, if it's a city, is in a position to see who can help them at what stage. And that has been very important for government, because when we told them, oh, why don't you go and see an MDB or a DFI, they were saying, yes, but who do we contact? And that is an opportunity to see who am I going to contact, for example, the World Bank EIB GAP fund, so they can see that they can receive technical assistance for project definition, who they can contact, they can automatically invite the person. So the matchmaking is good for the PPF because they receive only projects that are addressing their criteria, and good for the government because they can see who they can invite. And when we've done that, the government said, it's great. However, we're going to need to have more support because the PPFs of the world do not have enough financing to support the pipeline of projects that we have, because countries have hundreds, if not thousands, of projects. Yeah. So what we did is an online guidance. For example, while you are preparing your project and you're going through the source questions during the assessment and studies, and we know that project preparation can last between, 18, 24 months. But while the project is being prepared, there will be flags and automatic triggers in order to see how the project is addressing the best practices. For example, you are preparing your project by going through the different stages. There will be red flag, for example, on land availability, on how the risk has been allocated. In this case, it has been shared based on the answers to the question, but a typical allocation for land availability should be the public. So that is a good way to see how, in terms of best practice, the risk should be allocated. It doesn't mean it's wrong, because there can be a good reason for why it has been allocated that way, but it prepares the government to have a common language or same level discussion with the private sector entity. And we've done that with also inconsistencies within the platform, because we realize in the countries where it is being implemented that you have many different stakeholders involved in the project development, whether it's government, consultant, different agencies, MDBs, etc. So what we did is to have a way for inconsistencies to be triggered. For example, the government wants to meet the SDG 5, which is gender equality, but gender issues has not been taken into account into the social impact assessment. Something is inconsistent, or the economic internal rate of return is below the hurdle rate or the discount rate. Something is inconsistent. So there are red flags like this here. There are more than 60 to identify those inconsistencies. There can also be inconsistencies at the national level if necessary, if the government wants to. And there is also a dashboard on the SDGs. And that has also been important at the project level. So when we've done that, the government said, well, it's great, but I also have my own methodology internally. ISA, for example, they have their own methodology internally to assess project. So basically what we did, so in this case, you're going to see the methodology of Uzbekistan, but it's basically the same idea, is we took the question, their criteria, we make an alignment with the source questions. So again, same thing as the PPP risk matrix or the consistency check, is that while you are preparing your project and populating the platform, then you're going to have these answers automatically, this question automatically answered. And then the government is in a position to have either an automatic scoring or a manual one, traffic light or other. That was the decision of the government of Uzbekistan. So they are in a position to have a approved internal go, no-go type of process that is internalized. And what we decided to do is to do the same thing with international best practices or methodologies and labels, like the Fast Infra label, the QII indicators, the Blue Dot Network label, and others. So at least the government, the position that we took with Source is that how do we empower government that it's easier for them to see how the project is performing or aligned with different methodologies, and then they decide if they want to be accredited or certified by that methodology, but at least they see if the project preparation status is aligned with the question answered with that type of methodology. So it's easier for government instead of going into another website and populating again the same questions. So that was also a nice opportunity to do this. And finally, at any point in time, the government decide when to publish the information. So they decide when, they decide also the granularity, if they want to publish the result of the assessments, if they want to publish the contact information, if they want to publish specific documents. And then it is publicly available on Source, but also on the websites of the government. So we have connected Source to the website of Ecuador, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, and Uzbekistan in order to have the information as widely available, but also some jurisdiction they require to have that also published nationally also. So I will stop there so we can have time also for questions.
Yeah, I think just go to the other one. Yeah. Thanks, Christophe. I think that was very, very helpful just for us to fully understand and appreciate what Source is. Sort of some stuff that I've noted down as you were going through. And the first one is around Source is called a project preparation platform because it has templates that have been generated out of what you called a common framework. And the common framework is based on the many questions that you've been able to extract from different countries in terms of what the the private sector and the MDBs and so on and so forth would require in as far as making an investment decision. But you didn't stop there. You also incorporated the perspectives of government to say, for them, what's the word? The idea of investment ready, or the level of readiness, is defined when 1, 2, 3 things are met. What I want you to just do for us quickly, one is just talking in a little bit of detail around how these questions were actually derived. That's the first thing. And secondly, I mean, I can't help but admire the differentiated approach. I think you mentioned that there were 40 templates and the like. For me, that's one of the things that I've liked about the platform, that if you are doing a transport project, aviation, the questions are different to what you would get when you are doing a rail project. So just talk to us around how the questions were derived, and maybe while you are at it, one of the problems that we have in South Africa is not just about people don't want to do the work. And that's the thing that influences the quality of the pipeline. We have a capacity constraint. Yeah. And therefore, the simplicity of understanding the various concepts that you are using as part of the questions, how did you get to simplify that for, I won't say a lay person, but for an ordinary person who works on these kinds of issues, to really understand that, oh, actually, this question is asking this, and this is what I have to put in. Because remember, I mean, if the question is unclear, if the question is using very difficult words, people are just going to populate it however they understand it, or they're not going to populate it at all. And I just want you to help with those practical aspects.
That's a very good point, because this is what we see in many different systems or platforms that have been implemented in countries. For example, that's what I was giving as an example yesterday night with Japan. So they created a platform for countries to be able to share the quality of the road in order to make sure that it is well maintained, and we know when there will be a hole or a pothole and when it has to be taken care of, etc. So they developed an IT system in order to do that. And what was interesting from their point of view was that every time the technical assistance was finishing or it was over, the platform was not used anymore. And what we are doing in countries is two things. Is one, like a top-down, to make sure that it's institutionalized, like with ISA, that if it's a C project, it has to be on source, but also is a bottom-up, meaning that we spend a lot of time with line ministries and sponsors to explain why it's useful to use source. And every time we present it to the different ministries and agencies in different countries, for example, in Uzbekistan, the feedback was very powerful, because they were saying the questions are difficult and we are learning every day. And for them, it was a benefit, because they understood that we don't need to have 100% of the question answered, but it's a long-term view in order to capacitate our expertise internally over the long term. Is that the more we are going to use source, the more we are going to learn, and the better we are going to become over the long run. And that is also the view of France and Germany, is that the capacity also at the subnational level is low in terms of PPP, because it's complex, it's new. But for them, it's a long-term view to make sure that, oh, that is coming from the private sector, the templates. We know that these questions are important. We'll try to do our best to answer. But if we cannot, what is interesting, and this is what also Ecuador was identifying, is that we know where the gaps are, and it's easier for us to ask for technical assistance to DBSA, AFD, or others to help us fill that gap for that particular project because we know where it is. And we are not necessarily asking for an overall technical assistant for the entire project. And that is the feedback that is coming from the countries, which is very powerful because it empowers them to see where the gaps are and also have a long-term capacity building exercise. And this is related to the first question with the private sector, because the 7,000 comments that we have received from them is from the private sector point of view, they are basically saying there is no lack of projects. The pipeline of project is huge. If you Google it, you're going to have thousands, if not tens of thousands of projects globally. The problem is, how have they been prepared? It doesn't mean that they are looking for quality in terms of the data that have been checked, but at least where did you get the data? What type of questions have been answered? And for them, source is the answer to what they are always complaining about, is when we look at a project, we spend too much time looking for data instead of analyzing the project. And for them, source is like a recipe, is that they know what's in it, but they might not like the meal, but they have certainty of what it's in it. And this is what is changing the mindset of the private sector to say, we are not just looking for pipelines. We are looking for pipelines that is following a common framework that we know what's in it.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful. So what I should do at this point is to ask colleagues that are on the platform if they have questions that they would like to ask. I still have a few questions of my own, but colleagues, if you want to come in and contribute to the debate, please feel free to do that. Either leave comment in the chat. So far, I'm not seeing anything in the chat, but feel free to just raise your hand. And maybe while you are doing that, let me ask this question, Christophe. The issue of transparency. You told us, and this is an obvious question, you told us that you don't have access to some of these things, but we saw you went into projects, you did something and whatnot. How did you do
that's
that?
A test. No, that's a good point. Actually, I never say it, but I should. What I was showing you, the walkthrough, is a test environment. It's a fake environment. So the projects are not real, they are all fake, and we use it to do our test on the functionalities that we develop. Because in IT, I'm sure you are using different apps and sometimes it doesn't work. It's called a bug. So we also have bugs.
Yes.
So that's why we have this environment where we can test the environment. So it's not a real environment, it's really a fake one.
Okay.
Yeah.
The second thing that I would like you to clarify for me is who is targeted by source, not institutions, right? Is it people that are doing project development that are supposed to enter this information? Or is it anybody that is part of a team that understands the project enough that can actually go in and start answering some of these questions? And related is the question around the allocation of tasks. I'm on source, you are not. Okay, I need to allocate the task to you. How do I do that? Does it mean we invite you to register and so on and so forth? And that's what has to be done. And actually, on your point around the test environment, for colleagues that are on the line.
Just taking notes, otherwise I would forget the
questions. Just for colleagues on the line, some of them may not know this platform, but they just want to register and play around with it. Can they do that, or you penalize them if you see that someone is on the system doing this, doing that, and later on they are not using the platform fully? So I'm just asking this question just in case people want to just play around with the system and get more comfortable, see the kinds of questions which are being asked and so on and so forth. Maybe if you can just respond.
Yes. Absolutely. For the first question, maybe I can show you one example quickly, because I think in image it's going to be easier to understand. So, for example, what we have been doing in Kazakhstan. So the question on who fills the information and who it is targeted to, that really depends on what the country decides. For example, in Kazakhstan, they have the Ministry of Finance has developed an internal platform called ISSP, similar to PDMS or MIS in Indonesia or others internal systems. Basically, what they are asking the line ministries or the sponsors is to put the proposal that they have, the projects, into ISSP, so their internal platform. And then they validate which project is approved by the Ministry of Finance or the Treasury. Once it is validated by the Treasury, it is automatically sent to source through an API, an application programming interface. And then the line ministries can fill the information, they can work with MDBs, they can invite a private sector, whatever. So they go through the questions, the project assessments, and all the internal tasks they have inside ISSP is automatically updated into source and vice versa. So they go through this process on source. And when they arrive at the tender process, then they click on the button from the line ministry and saying, okay, ready for tender. Then the information is always live between ISSP and source, but then there is an alert for the Ministry of Finance to say, okay, now I'm going to check the project if it's ready for tender. So inside ISSP, they have all the information that has been completed inside source, the project assessment, the documents, the PFS, DFS, etc. And then they say, okay, it's good. So they do this internal assessment within their own system. They validate it, and then automatically it is sent to their e-procurement platform. And then when it is validated, the project has been awarded in construction, it is automatically sent back to source for the monitoring. So that is one example. But for example, in Panama, the view of the presidency is like, source is the highway, and the line ministries, they will have to go through source to get certain status approved. But in Uzbekistan, they don't have different systems. So they are using source because they don't have an internal IT system. Or in Peru, they are using Microsoft Project for PPP. So basically their tasks are linked to source. So this is how it works. It really depends on where we are. So that's what I just wanted to share in terms of demonstration.
Okay.
And then how to use it for Treasury colleagues. I see that Alvino is on the line. I think what I would advise is that Treasury basically requests ESA to be invited on the platform, because that would be an opportunity to see how it works, to see the information. And that is going back to the question on, I have a task, I want to invite someone. It's automatically done in source. Of course, you need to have the name, email, and then when you invite the person receives an email. They are redirected to the source login page. They enter it. They agree the user agreement, and the user agreement, basically what it does, it protects the user's data. For example, if you are using Facebook, there is a user agreement, and you agree that your data is sold and used by third parties. But on source, you agree that the data is yours and cannot be sold and shared with other parties. So that the user agreement protects the users on data sovereignty and data immunity that I was sharing before. And then the person has automatically access to the platform. So there is no need to go back to us to ask, can we invite that person? You are on your own. Of course, we are here if you need it. There is an administrator access also for the country to maintain the platform, to update your content. So there is also a full training that is provided to the country as well on that.
Okay. And where does the person who has admin rights in South Africa are they at ESA?
I don't know if I don't think it has been identified yet.
Okay.
So that is something that should be also, I mean, discussed internally within the government. There could be more than one admin access. It could be one at ESA, one at Treasury, but that's your decision as a government.
Yeah, no, and I actually think that I mean we'll have the conversation with ESA around some of these things, but I mean some colleagues we're just learning for the first time about source, and what I would say is that they should feel free to access the platform and just play around with it. I'll also put on the chat the what do we call it? The link.
Mr.
Just so
Mashilo?
that,
Yes, there's a question in the chat
Yes.
from Kenneth.
Yep, I'm gonna read it. To what extent does source platform incorporate project appraisal assessments such as cost benefit analysis and cost effective analysis to justify project? You know, that's a very good question. Today there is no standard on CBA or VFM. There are proposals from different organizations, like for example, the Asian Development Bank. They developed a tool to do value for money. At the World Bank, I'm discussing with the Chief Procurement Officer on Monday to see what they have developed in terms of procurement, standard bidding documents that could also be available into source, of course, at the discretion of the government to use it. But for the moment, we are not there yet because we are trying to find what is commonly approved by international organizations. But yeah, I think it will come at some point in order to have that type of information aggregated into a format that could be then, of course, validated by someone else if it makes sense as a CBA or a VFM. But yeah, for the moment, what we will ask is if there was a VFM being done, I think around stage 3, what was the result, what methodology was used. So there are different questions related to the VFM to also make sure that the information around that is also incorporated somewhere.
Maybe let me just add. I mean, in the case of South Africa specifically, my understanding is that source does not replace necessarily the feasibility study that you were, that you were meant to do, or pre-feasibility study, whatever the case may be. So, Kenneth, what it does do is, to the extent that you have done a cost-benefit analysis as per requirements of the appraisal and evaluation guideline, for example, of the Treasury, what it's going to ask you is, have you done a socioeconomic analysis? Then you say yes, and then you start asking, it starts asking those questions. What was the economic internal rate of return? Then you say 3.1 is to 3.7. Then it asks how many women are going to be empowered by this. Then you answer, and so on and so forth. So it might not in itself be able to have, help you in terms of developing a CA or a CBA. But I think if you want that information, you can always go to the other guidelines that are available to guide the development of these tools. And from there, what you can do is enter the information into the platform just for completeness sake, so that, I mean, when we talk about the level of preparedness, there's maybe just go into that section where we, on the platform itself, where we sort of see that it says you are 60% complete or 80% complete, whatever the case, whatever the case may be.
Yes.
So that's how I think it does deal with this particular issue. Yeah.
Great.
Okay. Great. Yeah. And maybe while we're having this conversation, can you just put the source, the link to source on the chat for colleagues to
the public site,
I
guess would be the most adequate.
Yeah. And then are there any other questions that colleagues would like to ask? this point in time, I'm not necessarily seeing hands or even the.
There's no hands. I'm checking. There's no hands at this point. Thanks.
There are no hands at this. Okay, so I mean, I can continue with my list of questions. The other thing, and I think there are some. Let me just check. There, I think I saw some colleagues. Yeah, Bongani Daga. I'm sure there are others as well. One of the things that I think is important if we want to have success on the platform is this linkage with existing systems. And you were talking about ISSP, sending information to this one and to that one and whatnot. The Treasury has a number of, whether you call IRM, whether you call, you talk about IDMS or any other system. And I think.
It's too loud.
Sorry? Okay, I think someone unmuted by mistake. We've got our own systems and the like, and I can really see the benefit in terms of how some of the projects which are being funded, and sometimes you don't always know, or you don't always have the information around what the project is about, what was intended for, how much it was going to cost, and so on and so forth, and so forth. And I think linkage to the platform, to the source platform might also be useful from that perspective. So maybe just talk to us. I know you've mentioned this thing about linkage with other systems. How difficult is that? And are there cases where you say, no, not with this one, we can't link it? And then again, I'm asking this just so that this is something that we can also think about within the country around if we have to link it to other systems. Which are those systems? And
and I think also we will try to make it short. We heard the comments, so we can also go just finalize here with this last point. Is that we had a meeting this morning with the World Bank with Bekele, and he was quite impressed to see that that has been developed. He didn't know about it, even if he's in the World Bank. So it shows also the silos that are inside international organizations. But what he realized is that this is an opportunity to have a common framework and information flow inside the country for the different ministries and agencies. He was mentioning the work they've done with IDMS, and he was basically saying that would be a great opportunity if the government decide to see how they could be connected, because that, if we look at what the donors or the private sector is looking for, is always to have access to information. But in order to get there, it's important that the information flows between the different ministries and agencies. What we see in countries is that when you have this type of connection between internal systems, it's not complicated. It's basically just the government telling us this is the type of connection that we need between the two. So if there is a task that is validated inside IDMS, it should also be inside source and vice versa, and maybe just a few or all of them, etc. But at least the internal country process is aligned with the standard templates that we have. So that creates a common language, but for everyone inside the country. And from our perspective, we don't have anything to gain whether or not IDMS and source are connected or other systems. The only mandate that we have, first, we are not funded by the countries to get source. It's delivered as a public good. The only mandate that we have is how do we make your life easier when it comes to project development? That's all. So I think this is how you should see us, is if you have needs and you see more efficiency that can be created with different functionalities, different connection with different platforms, and we are here to do it. So I think that would be the main message that I want to pass, and not to take too much of your time online. So yeah, I think that would be the main message.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, Christophe. I think, I mean, we are nearly at the end of our time, colleagues. There is a link on the chat where we're just asking for your feedback just in terms of this session. Are there any concluding remarks before we close the session?
No, I think don't hesitate to ask any question bilaterally as well if you have any doubts. I think the problem that we have with Source is that it's complicated. It's a software. There's a lot of information, but I think what usually kills a project is assumptions. So don't hesitate to ask me or ask anyone specific question that you didn't want to ask in front of everyone. But I think clarity will make sure that we have a good way forward to make, again, the life of the public sector officials easier. One thing that is unique to Source, that will be my last comment, are the templates. You will not find the templates anywhere else. So we are not in a position anymore to say, oh, but Source is one platform among others. Well, there is no other like it when it comes to the templates. So we are here to make it available at your convenience if you want to benefit from it.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, the point that I would also conclude on, just based on what you've said, is that if colleagues think of new questions or any other question that you couldn't ask on this platform, get in touch with Anita or myself, and then we'll find a way of transmitting that message to Source, but also including ESA, simply because ESA at this point in time is the custodian. Let's call it the custodian of Source as a platform within the country. So we also don't want to be creating a lot of confusion by creating too many contact points. And I'm glad that Alvino is on the line, which is the person that we will go through just in terms of the thinking that we have around our specific work areas. We would like it integrated with this one. These are the questions that were not clear, or this is what you have to think about, and so on and so forth, just so that we have one country direction in terms of what we would like to get out of the system. And lastly, let me end by thanking you for making the time to have a chat with us, educating us on what this platform is about. And to the colleagues that are online, thank you very much for joining this session. It was organized at very short notice, but we do hope that we will see you for the future conversations that we will have with the various speakers. Take care, and thank you very much. It's really appreciated.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.